A veteran lost his family in a car accident. What he and his dog found in the mountains will move you. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The wind howled through the mountains as Grant Mercer trudged through the snow-covered path, his worn boots crunching under the weight of the icy ground. His breath was visible in the air, rising like smoke from the ashes of a life he no longer recognized. His loyal German shepherd, Scout, trotted beside him, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings, alert to every shift in the cold breeze. Grant's face was lined with the kind of exhaustion that only years of loss could bring. At 40 years old, he looked older than his years. The weight of what he had lost pressed heavily on him. The memory of that day, the day the accident happened, still fresh in his mind. It had been a year since the crash. The crash that took his wife, his 2 young children, and everything he had ever known. The police report had been clear: a slick stretch of road, a tire that gave way, and in the blink of an eye, his whole world was shattered. Now, all that remained was the cold, empty house and the relentless sorrow that seemed to follow him everywhere. But today, something had pulled him out of the house, something deep within him that whispered of the need to move forward. The mountains had always been a place of peace for him, a sanctuary where he could breathe without the weight of memories hanging over him. He had always found solace in the quiet of the peaks, the stillness that enveloped him like a blanket, and he hoped that maybe, just maybe, it could help him heal. The mountain pass he was heading to was remote, forgotten by most. But it was here that he had promised himself he would start over. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he felt that the mountains held something, a secret, an answer, perhaps. As he neared the edge of the cliff, Scout suddenly stopped, his ears perked, and his body stiffened. Grant glanced down at the dog, a sense of unease creeping into his chest. Scout rarely reacted like this, especially on these familiar paths. The dog barked once, then began pulling toward the trees. Grant hesitated but followed. There was something in Scout's urgency that felt different, like a call he couldn't ignore. They veered off the trail and moved deeper into the woods. The trees stood tall and dark, their branches heavy with snow, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. The further they went, the more the world seemed to close in on them, the wind picking up and swirling through the trees. Grant's heart began to race. What could Scout sense that he couldn't? As they ventured deeper, they reached a small clearing. There, half buried in the snow, was a wooden structure, a small cabin, almost invisible to the casual observer. Grant's pulse quickened. He hadn't expected to find anything here. This was the last place he thought something could be hidden. Scout barked again, now frantic, running toward the door of the cabin. Grant's hand reached for the door, and with a creak, it opened. Inside, it was dark, cold, and untouched by time. Dust covered the furniture, but something about the place felt familiar. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat: a photograph. It was old, yellowed with age, but there was no mistaking the faces in it. The faces of his family, smiling back at him from a time long before the crash. They were here, in this forgotten cabin, staring back at him from a world he thought he had lost forever. The cabin was a strange place, frozen in time. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust, and something else, something that made Grant's chest tighten. He stepped further into the room, his boots creaking on the wooden floorboards. Scout, his loyal dog, was already sniffing around the edges of the room, his nose twitching at the air as though searching for something unseen. Grant stood still for a moment, his eyes scanning the room. The photograph in his hand was still fresh in his mind, the faces of his family staring back at him from another time. He looked down at the dusty wooden table, noticing a collection of objects scattered across it. Papers, books, a small metal box, and some old photographs. His fingers brushed the edges of the photo. He had to know more. Grant carefully set the photo down on the table and moved toward the other items. His eyes landed on the small metal box. He opened it cautiously, revealing a collection of old letters and trinkets, each one appearing more precious than the last. One letter in particular caught his attention. It was addressed to his father, written in the elegant script of someone he didn't recognize. Grant's pulse quickened as he unfolded the letter. It was from a man named Elias Thorne. The letter spoke of a hidden inheritance, a treasure passed down through generations, hidden away in this very cabin. But the letter did not elaborate on what exactly the treasure was. Instead, it simply said, "When the time is right, the truth will be revealed." The words echoed in Grant's mind. What truth? What treasure? His thoughts were interrupted by Scout's bark, followed by the sound of scratching at the floor. Grant turned just in time to see the dog digging furiously at a corner of the cabin floor, his paws working with desperation. Grant's heart raced as he knelt beside Scout, his hands trembling with anticipation. The dog's persistence paid off when he unearthed a small, hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. It was a small wooden box, old and weathered by time. With a sense of reverence, Grant carefully lifted the box and opened it. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, was a small key. It was simple, unassuming, but it felt heavy in his hand, like it carried the weight of all the secrets this cabin had been hiding for so long. Grant stood up, holding the key, staring at it in disbelief. It was a key to something, but to what? There was only one way to find out. He pocketed the key and turned to Scout, whose tail wagged as though sensing the significance of what they had just uncovered. Together, they made their way outside, the mountain air biting at Grant's face as he stepped back into the cold light of day. The storm had passed, and the landscape before him was peaceful, but Grant felt anything but calm. Something inside him had shifted. The mountain was no longer just a place of refuge. It was now the key to understanding his family's past. The truth that had been hidden for so long was finally within reach. Grant and Scout made their way down the path, the sound of their footsteps crunching in the snow the only noise breaking the silence. The cabin, now just a memory behind them, seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting for Grant to unlock its final secret. They reached the foot of the mountain, where a small stream ran through the rocks, its waters trickling over the frozen surface. Grant paused, looking down at the stream. He had always been drawn to water, to its stillness, its quiet strength. He felt that same pull now, as though the water held a message for him, a message from the past. He crouched by the stream, his fingers brushing the ice, and then he saw it. A small, weathered stone, half buried in the dirt by the bank. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. It was smooth, worn down by years of water running over it. But there was something inscribed on the stone. It took Grant a moment to make out the faded letters. The key to your future lies in the mountain's heart. His breath caught in his throat. This was it. This was the message his family had left behind. The key, the hidden treasures, the truth, it was all connected. And the heart of the mountain was waiting to be discovered. Grant stood still by the stream, the weight of the stone in his hand heavy with meaning. The words etched into its surface seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't quite explain. The key to your future lies in the mountain's heart. It was a message so clear, yet shrouded in mystery. The mountain had always been a place of refuge for him, but now it felt as though it was much more than just a silent observer of his grief. It had a story to tell, and he was determined to uncover it. His thoughts were interrupted by Scout's gentle bark, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this journey. The dog, ever loyal and vigilant, was now standing at the base of a rocky outcrop, his nose twitching with interest. Grant's heart raced, with anticipation as he approached the dog, who seemed to sense something just out of sight. He followed Scout's gaze to the base of the rocks, where the ground appeared disturbed. The snow had been recently shifted, revealing an opening in the rock, a hidden entrance. The mountain's heart, perhaps? Grant knelt down, his hands trembling as he cleared the snow from the rocks. The opening was narrow, but just wide enough for him to squeeze through. He hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it. The secret his family had hidden for so long was waiting to be uncovered. Grant looked at Scout, who was already by his side, tail wagging as if urging him forward. With a deep breath, Grant pushed his way through the opening, his body scraping against the jagged rocks as he entered the dark passage. Inside, the air was cool and damp, the smell of earth and stone filling his nostrils. The passage was narrow, and the only light came from the faint glow of the daylight filtering in from the entrance. As he moved further in, he noticed markings on the walls, strange symbols that seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. They were unlike anything he had ever seen before, intricate and mysterious, as though they were telling a story all their own. Grant continued deeper into the cave, the passage twisting and turning in ways that seemed unnatural. His footsteps echoed in the stillness, and every so often, Scout would stop, his ears perked, as if hearing something Grant couldn't. But the further they went, the more a sense of awe filled him. This place felt sacred, as though it had been waiting for him, or someone like him, to discover it. After what felt like hours, the passage finally opened up into a vast underground chamber. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols, but here, they seemed to glow with an ethereal light, casting shadows that danced along the stone floor. In the center of the chamber, resting atop a pedestal, was a large stone chest. It was old, its surface worn with the passage of time, but it was unmistakable. This was the treasure his family had hidden away, the key to their past, and perhaps, to his future. Grant approached the chest slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This chest held the answers, the secrets that had been buried for generations. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cool stone. As his hand made contact, the chest seemed to react, a low rumble echoing through the chamber. The ground beneath him trembled slightly, and the chest slowly began to open. Inside, there was a single object, a large, ornate key, unlike anything Grant had ever seen before. It was made of polished gold, its intricate design shining in the dim light. It was beautiful, and yet, it felt familiar. This was the key he had been searching for, the one his family had left behind for him to find. But what did it open? Grant's mind raced as he picked up the key, its weight grounding him in the moment. It was a symbol of his family's legacy, of their strength and resilience. But it was also a symbol of his own journey, his own healing. With the key in his hand, Grant felt a sense of clarity, as though the path ahead was becoming clearer. He knew that the journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. There was more to discover, more to understand. And with Scout by his side, he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. He turned back to the entrance of the chamber, the key tightly grasped in his hand. The mountain had revealed its secret, and now it was time to unlock the next chapter of his life. Grant stood at the entrance of the cave, the golden key still warm in his hand, its weight grounding him in the reality of what had just transpired. Scout sat quietly by his side, his amber eyes reflecting the same curiosity and anticipation that Grant felt. The underground chamber had revealed more than just a chest. It had opened a door to something greater, something that felt like a calling, a connection to a past he hadn't even known existed. The air in the cave felt still, almost reverent, as though it too was waiting for the next step. Grant's heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. What was he supposed to do with this key? And more importantly, what lay beyond this cave? As the memories of his family and the years of grief that had come with losing them flooded back, he knew deep down that finding the chest had only been part of the journey. He was being led to something more, something that would change everything. He took a deep breath and turned back towards the mountain's entrance. The path back was as rugged and unforgiving as it had been before, but now it felt different, charged with a sense of purpose. With each step, the key seemed to burn brighter in his pocket, as if urging him forward. The wind had died down since he first entered the cave, and the forest around him was eerily silent. He walked alongside Scout. The only sound now was the crunch of their footsteps in the fresh snow. There was a familiar sense of peace in the quiet, but also a sense of expectation, as if something was about to shift. Grant could feel it in his bones. They had arrived at a clearing when Scout suddenly stopped, his ears perked up, and his body tense. Grant looked around, his senses heightened. The dog had never acted like this before, not even in the most remote areas of the wilderness they had explored together. Something was out there. Grant crouched down, placing his hand on Scout's back. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. But the dog didn't respond with his usual reassurance. He was still and alert, watching the trees. Grant's eyes scanned the surroundings, the silence pressing in on him. Then he saw it. A faint glimmer through the trees, just a flicker of light, barely visible against the shadow of the mountain. It was coming from the direction of the old cabin, the place where everything had begun. Without hesitation, Grant stood up and began walking toward it, Scout right by his side. As they drew closer, the light grew brighter, but it wasn't the harsh, artificial glow of a lamp or fire. It was soft, almost like the glow of the moon reflecting off a lake. When they reached the cabin, Grant stopped dead in his tracks. There, in the clearing just beyond the cabin, was a figure, a woman, standing with her back to him, gazing at the horizon. She was dressed in a long coat, her hair flowing loosely in the wind. There was something ethereal about her, like she didn't belong to this world. Grant's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know who she was. But there was a strange sense of recognition, a feeling that he had been waiting for her. The woman turned slowly, as though she had sensed his presence. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, everything around him seemed to still. The world faded into the background, and all that mattered was her gaze. "You've come," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight of ancient wisdom. Grant's throat tightened. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The woman smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "I am the keeper of the truth," she said. "The truth that has been hidden for generations. And you, Grant, are the one chosen to unlock it." Grant's mind raced. "Unlock it? How?" She gestured toward the cabin. "The answers are inside," she said. "But only you can find them. You have the key." Grant looked down at the golden key in his hand. It glowed faintly, as though it was waiting for something. The woman's expression softened. "The key is not just to a door, Grant. It is the key to understanding. Understanding your family's past, your legacy, and your future. You have been searching for meaning, for a way forward. The answers have always been here, just waiting for you to see them." The weight of her words settled heavily in his chest. He had come to the mountains seeking solace, hoping to find a way to heal. But now, it seemed the mountain was offering him something far greater, something that could change the course of his life. "The treasure," Grant said slowly. "It's not just about money or material things, is it?" The woman shook her head. "No, Grant. The treasure is the legacy of your family, the strength they passed down to you. But it's not just about them. It's about you, too. You've suffered great loss, but you are not broken. You are the key to bringing the past and the future together." The woman's gaze softened as she stepped aside, motioning for Grant to enter the cabin. "Go. The answers are waiting for you inside. And remember, you are not alone. You never were." Grant nodded, his heart pounding in his chest as he stepped past her and into the cabin. Inside, he knew that whatever he discovered next would shape the rest of his life. Grant stepped into the cabin, the door creaking behind him as he entered the dimly lit interior. The air was cool, tinged with the smell of old wood and the faint scent of something unfamiliar, something ancient. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the simple furnishings, the worn rugs, and the quiet stillness that filled the space. It felt as though time had forgotten this place, but it also felt like it was waiting, patiently, for someone to discover its secrets. The woman's words echoed in his mind. "The answers are inside." The golden key in his hand seemed to burn with anticipation, its weight now more significant than ever. He approached the fireplace, where a faint glow flickered in the hearth, casting long shadows across the walls. The fire had clearly been abandoned long ago, but the embers still held a quiet warmth. As Grant knelt to examine the fire pit, his eyes caught sight of something tucked behind the hearth, a small, wooden box. It was old, carved with intricate designs, its surface worn smooth from years of neglect. He reached for it, the key in his pocket suddenly feeling heavier. It was as if the box itself was calling to him. As his fingers brushed the surface, a strange sensation washed over him, a pull, as if the box held the final piece of the puzzle. He opened it slowly, revealing a stack of papers, old, yellowed documents, their edges frayed with age. Among the papers was another photograph, this one even older than the first. The faces in the picture were unfamiliar, yet somehow familiar. A man and a woman, standing together in front of a large estate, their faces full of hope and expectation. At the bottom of the photograph, scrawled in elegant handwriting, were the words, "Our legacy is yours to carry." Grant's breath caught in his throat. These were his ancestors, the ones who had hidden the treasure, the ones who had left this legacy for him to uncover. But why? And what did it mean? As he flipped through the papers, the answers began to reveal themselves. The documents were letters, contracts, and journals that told the story of his family's rise and fall. They had once been wealthy, their fortune built on land, investments, and valuable secrets passed down through generations. But something had gone wrong. A betrayal, a lost fortune, and a decision to hide away the family's wealth in secret places, waiting for the day when the right person would come to reclaim it. Grant's heart pounded as he read further. The final letter, dated many years ago, spoke of a plan to hide the family's treasure in the mountain where no one would think to look. The letter explained that the treasure wasn't just about money, but about power, about reclaiming a legacy that had been lost to time. And now, Grant was the one who had been chosen to find it. The final sentence in the letter made his chest tighten. Only the one who can see beyond the past will unlock the future. Grant set the letter down, his mind racing. What did this mean? The treasure was not just about reclaiming wealth. It was about reclaiming his family's place in the world, a legacy that had been buried with his ancestors. But how would he unlock it? What was the key to understanding the past? He turned back to the photograph, his eyes lingering on the faces of the man and woman. They seemed to look back at him, as if urging him to continue. He glanced around the cabin, trying to make sense of it all. Then his eyes fell upon something else, an old wooden chest, standing against the far wall. It was nearly identical to the one he had found in the cave, but this one was much larger, its surface covered in intricate carvings. He felt a sudden surge of determination. This was it. This was what he had been searching for. The chest was locked, but the golden key in his pocket fit perfectly into the lock. As he turned the key, the chest creaked open, revealing its contents. Inside was a collection of maps, letters, and other items, all pointing to a hidden location deep in the mountains, far beyond the cabin. Grant knew without a doubt that this was the final step, the culmination of everything he had discovered. He had found the key, the map, and the answers. It was time to unlock the future. He stood up, clutching the key and the papers tightly in his hands. Scout, who had been sitting quietly by the fire, stood and padded over to his side, as if sensing the importance of the moment. Grant looked down at his loyal companion and nodded. "Let's go, boy," he said softly. Together they turned toward the door, the weight of the past and the future resting heavily on Grant's shoulders. He knew the journey ahead would not be easy, but he also knew that it was the only way forward. The mountain had shown him the path, and now it was up to him to walk it. With the key in his hand and Scout by his side, Grant stepped out of the cabin and into the cold, clear night. The stars above seemed to watch over him, guiding him toward the future he was about to unlock. Grant stepped out of the cabin, the cold air biting at his face as the door creaked shut behind him. Scout trotted at his side, his ears perked, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, the weight of the moment. The golden key, still warm in his hand, seemed to pull him forward, urging him to continue down the path laid out before him. The map inside the chest was clear now, showing a trail that led deep into the mountains, far beyond the reaches of the cabin he had just left. It was as if the mountain itself had guided him here, to uncover the secrets that had been hidden for generations. The night was dark, but the stars above seemed to shine brighter than ever, as though they, too, were watching over him. The quiet stillness of the forest around him felt like a living thing, breathing softly, waiting. Grant's steps were steady as he walked toward the path that would lead him to his family's legacy. The journey ahead was not going to be easy. He knew the mountain well, but this path was different, unfamiliar. It twisted and turned, climbing higher with each step, the terrain growing more rugged as the minutes passed. But with every step, he felt closer to something he couldn't quite explain. A purpose, a connection to something larger than himself. Scout stayed close, his paws silent against the snow, moving with the precision of a companion who had been through many journeys before. They climbed for hours, the cold air growing thinner as they ascended the mountain. Grant's breath came in visible puffs, but he felt a fire inside him, one that had been dormant for too long. The grief, the pain, the loss of his family, it was all still there, but now it felt like a distant memory, a shadow that was slowly fading away with each step he took. He was not the same man who had arrived at the cabin. He was becoming someone else, someone who was ready to face the truth, no matter what it might be. As they reached the summit, the path flattened out, leading them to a narrow ridge that overlooked a vast valley. The view was breathtaking, miles of untouched wilderness stretching out before them, bathed in the pale light of the moon. But it was not the beauty of the landscape that caught Grant's attention. It was the sight of something in the distance, a glimmer of light shining from the heart of the mountain. The map had led him here, to this very spot. He felt the pull again, stronger now, as if the mountain itself was calling to him. The key in his hand seemed to hum with a quiet energy, as though it had been waiting for this moment. With a determined step, Grant moved toward the source of the light. The ground beneath him was uneven, the rocks sharp and treacherous, but he pressed on, driven by an unshakable sense of purpose. Scout stayed close, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. The silence of the mountain was deafening, but in that silence, Grant could hear something else, a whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. It was a voice, soft and distant, calling his name. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but the voice grew clearer, more distinct. Grant. The sound came again, and this time, he recognized it. It was his mother's voice, a voice he had not heard in years, a voice that had haunted his dreams since the accident. His heart pounded in his chest as he continued forward, the voice guiding him, pulling him closer to the source of the light. The ridge eventually gave way to a small, hidden cave, its entrance nearly concealed by the surrounding rocks. The light emanated from within, soft but constant. Grant approached cautiously, his hand tightening around the key. The golden key felt heavier now, its presence undeniable. He stepped into the cave, the warmth inside contrasting sharply with the cold outside. The air was thick with the scent of earth and something else, something ancient. The light seemed to come from the walls themselves, which were covered in more of the strange symbols he had seen back in the cabin. These symbols, however, were different. They were alive, glowing faintly with an otherworldly energy. At the center of the cave stood a stone altar, carved into the mountain itself. On the altar rested an object, an ancient chest, just like the one he had found in the cabin. It was larger now, more ornate, its surface covered in intricate carvings, and the same strange symbols. The key in Grant's hand seemed to draw him toward it. He stepped forward, placing the key into the lock on the chest. As he turned the key, a low rumble echoed through the cave, the stone altar shifting as though it were coming to life. The chest creaked open slowly, revealing what lay inside. Grant's breath caught in his throat. It was not gold or jewels, but something far more valuable, a collection of journals, each one carefully preserved, their pages filled with the history of his family. This was the legacy his ancestors had left behind. These journals contained the story of their rise and fall, their struggles, their triumphs, and their secrets. As Grant began to flip through the pages, the weight of the past hit him with full force. These were the answers he had been searching for. The journals spoke of the treasure, yes, but not the kind of treasure most people would expect. This treasure was knowledge, a legacy of wisdom, strength, and resilience. And now, it was his to carry. He looked up at Scout, the dog sitting quietly beside him, his amber eyes reflecting the same understanding that Grant felt. The journey had not been about finding gold or riches. It had been about finding his place, his purpose. And now, with the truth in his hands, he knew that he was ready to unlock the future. Grant stood still, the journals in his hands heavy with the weight of history. The flickering light from the cave's walls cast long shadows, stretching across the stone floor like silent witnesses to the unfolding story. Each page he turned revealed more of his family's past, more than he ever expected to find. It wasn't just about wealth or hidden treasures, but about resilience, about choices made in the face of adversity, and the quiet strength that had kept his ancestors going through the darkest times. The journals were full of wisdom, lessons of survival, of what it meant to endure, to rebuild, and to find meaning in the midst of hardship. As he read, Grant realized that what had been buried wasn't just his family's riches. It was their soul, their values, passed down through generations. This was the legacy they had left for him, and it was more powerful than anything he could have imagined. With the journals clutched tightly in his hands, Grant stood up from the altar. The quiet hum of the cave seemed to respond to his movement, the walls shifting slightly, as if acknowledging his decision to carry this burden forward. Scout, ever loyal, stood at his side, his gaze steady and understanding. There was no need for words between them. They both knew that this was just the beginning of something much larger. He had come here seeking answers, and now he had them. But the answers were not simple. They were a call to action, a reminder of the responsibility he now bore. The weight of the journals, both literal and figurative, felt more like a torch being passed than a burden being placed on his shoulders. Outside, the night sky had shifted. The moon now hung high above the mountain, casting a silver glow over the landscape. Grant stepped out of the cave and into the open air, the cold night biting at his skin. The mountain, which had once felt so intimidating, now felt like home. It was no longer a place of sorrow or loss. It was a place of clarity and purpose. He had the knowledge now, and with it, a sense of direction. The treasure he had uncovered wasn't buried beneath the earth or hidden in gold. It was within him, in the form of the legacy he had inherited, the lessons of those who came before him. Scout walked beside him, his paws crunching in the snow, the only sound breaking the stillness of the night. As they descended the mountain, Grant's thoughts turned inward. He had always believed that the journey was about finding peace, about healing from the pain that had consumed him since the accident. But now, he understood that it was more than that. It was about carrying forward the strength of his ancestors, about rebuilding what had been broken, not just in his own life, but in the lives of those who had come before him. The responsibility was clear. He would honor their memory by living up to the legacy they had left behind. As they neared the base of the mountain, Grant felt a shift within himself. The grief, the anger, the uncertainty, all of it began to melt away. He wasn't just a man who had lost his family anymore. He was a man who had found his purpose. And with that purpose came a new sense of clarity. He knew what he had to do. The first step was to return to the village, to the people who had been a part of his past, and share with them the knowledge he had uncovered. The second step was to rebuild, not just the physical structures that had been damaged by time and neglect, but the relationships, the community that had been fractured long ago. Grant knew it would be a long road. But now, he had the strength to walk it. He could already feel the change within him, the sense of peace that had eluded him for so long settling into his heart. With Scout by his side and the journals as his guide, he was ready to face whatever came next. They reached the village just as the sun was beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light across the rooftops. The town, which had once felt like a place of ghosts and memories, now seemed full of possibilities. The future, which had once seemed so uncertain, was now laid out before him, a path illuminated by the knowledge of the past. Grant knew the journey wasn't over, but he was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. The weight of the past had transformed into the strength of the future. And as he walked into the village, he felt the first stirrings of hope in his heart. The mountain had given him its secrets, and now it was time to share them with the world. Grant stood at the edge of the village, the journals clutched tightly in his hands, the weight of history and legacy pressing down on him. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the rooftops and the winding dirt roads of the small community. It was a sight he hadn't truly seen in years, not in this way. For the first time, he felt a sense of belonging, a connection to the people, to the land, to the past. Scout was by his side, his tail swishing contentedly, as if sensing the change in the air. The village, once a place filled with memories of loss and sorrow, now felt like a canvas, ready to be painted with new hopes and dreams. As Grant walked down the familiar streets, people began to notice him. At first, they watched from their doorways, hesitant, unsure of what to make of his return. It had been a long time since he had left, and the shadows of his past still lingered in their eyes. But as he passed by, something shifted. A few nodded, a few smiled. A few brave souls even stepped forward to offer a greeting. He returned their gestures, but his mind was still elsewhere, still processing the discoveries he had made. His family's legacy was not one of riches and grandeur, but one of resilience and strength. The journals had revealed a different truth than the one he had imagined. The real treasure was not in the hidden vaults or buried treasures, but in the lessons passed down through the generations. Grant knew he had a duty now. It wasn't just about honoring his family's past. It was about shaping the future, building something better, something that would last long after he was gone. He had been given the tools, the knowledge, and the strength to do it. The question was, where to begin? As he reached the center of the village, he saw the old town hall, a building that had stood for generations. It was weathered, worn, but still strong. It had been the heart of the community, a place where decisions were made, where people came together. But over the years, it had fallen into disrepair, much like the village itself. People had stopped coming, stopped believing that anything could change. But Grant knew that this was where he needed to start. He walked up the steps to the front door, his boots heavy on the old wood. He paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the building. This was the place that would symbolize the beginning of something new. The door creaked open as he pushed it, revealing the dusty interior. The room was filled with old furniture, empty shelves, and faded documents. It was a place that had once been full of life, full of hope. Now, it felt abandoned, forgotten. But Grant could feel the energy of the past still lingering in the air. It was in the walls, in the very floor beneath his feet. He walked to the center of the room, his hand resting lightly on the old wooden table that had been used for so many meetings, so many decisions. This was where the future would be decided. This was where he would rebuild. As he stood there, the memories of his family came flooding back, his father's quiet strength, his mother's unwavering belief in the community, his ancestors' perseverance through hardship. They had all sacrificed so much, and now it was his turn to give something back. Grant knew that he couldn't do it alone. He needed the village, the people who had lived here long before him. He needed their strength, their wisdom, their unity. It was time to rebuild, not just the buildings, but the community itself. He turned to the door, calling out to anyone who might be nearby. Slowly, people began to gather, drawn by the sound of his voice, by the quiet determination that radiated from him. They didn't know what he was planning, but they knew that something had changed. They knew that Grant was back, and with him, the hope of a new beginning. One by one, the villagers approached, hesitant at first, but soon standing together in the center of the room. Grant looked at them, his heart swelling with pride. These were the people who would help him rebuild. They were the foundation of this village, and together, they would create something stronger than ever before. He spoke to them then, his voice steady and clear. I know it hasn't been easy. I know the past has left scars, has left us broken in many ways. But we have the strength to heal. We have the strength to rebuild, not just this town, but ourselves. The legacy of my family, the legacy of those who came before us, is not one of wealth or land. It is one of resilience, of doing what is right even when the road is hard. I'm here to help lead us back to that. We have a chance now, a chance to create something lasting, something that honors the past while building a future for our children and their children. It's time we take that first step together. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. But then, slowly, people began to nod. They began to step forward, offering their support, their hands, their hearts. And in that moment, Grant knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be worth it. The past had shaped him, but it was the future that would define him. And with the people of this village by his side, he was ready to face it. The days following Grant's meeting with the villagers were a blur of activity and determination. The transformation of the town didn't happen overnight, but with every passing day, something was shifting, something was being rebuilt, not just in the physical sense, but in the hearts of the people. It wasn't easy. Nothing ever is when it comes to rebuilding. But Grant felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. The community, once fractured by time and neglect, was coming together. And with each step they took toward rebuilding the town, they were also rebuilding their lives, their sense of belonging, and their hope for the future. The weather was beginning to warm, the snow on the ground slowly melting away, revealing the earth beneath. As Grant walked through the streets, he couldn't help but feel a deep connection to this place, to the land, to the people. It had taken losing so much to finally understand what it meant to truly belong. There were days when the weight of the past felt heavy, when the memories of his family, of his wife and children, would rush to the surface, threatening to overwhelm him. But in those moments, Grant would look at the people around him, the men and women who had once been strangers, who had now become his partners in this journey, and he felt the warmth of their support. And that warmth was enough to push through the pain. The town hall was the first place they focused on, restoring it to its former glory. Grant had spent countless hours poring over the journals his family had left him, finding inspiration in their resilience. His ancestors had fought to preserve this town, to make it thrive, and he was determined to do the same. He worked alongside the villagers, their hands stained with paint, their muscles sore from the labor, but their hearts filled with pride. The work was hard, but they did it together, and in that unity, Grant found healing. Days turned into weeks, and before long, the town hall was transformed. It stood as a symbol of what they had accomplished, a physical reminder of their strength, their ability to overcome, and their unwavering commitment to one another. But the restoration of the town hall was just the beginning. The rest of the village began to follow suit. Houses were repaired, shops were reopened, and life slowly began to return to the streets. As the town transformed, so too did Grant. He had always been a man who kept his emotions buried deep, too afraid to confront the grief that had consumed him. But now, as he watched the village come back to life, he realized that healing didn't come from avoiding the pain. It came from facing it, from acknowledging it, and then choosing to move forward. And that was exactly what he had done. As spring gave way to summer, the air in the village seemed lighter, the weight of the past lifting with each passing day. The villagers began to celebrate again, gathering in the town square for festivals, for music, for food, for laughter. It wasn't the same as it had been before, but it was something new, something better. And it was theirs. It was a rebirth, not just for the town, but for Grant himself. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Grant stood on the steps of the newly restored town hall, looking out at the village. The streets were filled with people, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of lanterns, their voices carrying in the night air. It was a peaceful scene, one that he never thought he would see again. But here it was, unfolding before him. And as he stood there, a sense of fulfillment washed over him. He had found his purpose, his place, and his peace. The past had shaped him, but it was the future that was now his to create. The journey had been long, filled with pain and loss, but it had also been filled with growth and redemption. Grant had come to the mountains searching for answers, and in the end, he had found more than he could have ever imagined. He had found a community, a legacy, and a reason to keep moving forward. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting its final rays across the land, and for the first time in a long time, Grant felt at peace. He was home. Months passed, and the village continued to thrive under the steady hands of the community. Grant stood at the center of it all, now fully integrated into the life he had once abandoned. The transformation of the town was nothing short of remarkable, and with it, his own transformation was equally profound. The grief that had once consumed him no longer held sway over his every thought. He had faced the weight of his past, uncovered the legacy of his family, and through that process, rebuilt not only a community, but himself. As the village flourished, so did Grant's relationships. His bond with the people who had once been strangers had grown strong. They worked side by side, not just on physical projects, but on healing the emotional wounds that had lingered for so long. It wasn't easy. There were moments when old memories resurfaced, when doubt crept in, and when it felt like the future was just as uncertain as it had once seemed. But those moments were fleeting, and each time they came, Grant found himself better equipped to handle them. The quiet nights by the fire with Scout at his side had become his refuge, a space where he could reflect and find peace. The village was no longer just a place he had returned to, it was home. It had become a living testament to the power of resilience, of community, and of the deep, unshakable strength that lay within every individual. And in his heart, Grant knew this was just the beginning. There was still much work to do, not only in the village but in the world beyond. The journals he had found, the lessons of his ancestors, had shown him a path forward, a path that went far beyond the borders of the village. He had been given a new purpose, a new direction, and the strength to pursue it. One day, as the seasons shifted once again, Grant found himself standing at the edge of the village, looking out at the mountain. It was a familiar sight, one that had once seemed so distant and imposing. But now, it felt like an old friend, a companion that had been with him through every step of his journey. The mountain, which had once symbolized his greatest loss, now stood as a monument to his greatest victory. It had witnessed his pain, his struggle, and his growth. And it would continue to stand as a reminder that no matter how hard the climb, there was always a way to reach the summit. He knew now that his work was not finished. The legacy of his family, the knowledge that had been passed down through generations, was not just meant for him. It was meant to be shared. There were other towns, other communities, that needed to hear the same message, need to know that no matter how broken they felt, they could rebuild. With the journals as his guide and scout by his side, Grant set out to spread the lessons of resilience, hope, and unity that had transformed his own life. He had no illusions that it would be easy. There would be challenges, obstacles, and moments of doubt. But now, he faced those challenges with the same quiet strength his ancestors had shown. He knew that he could not change the past, but he could shape the future. And with that knowledge, Grant felt the weight of his family's legacy, not as a burden, but as a gift. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was his to walk, and he would walk it with his head held high. As the sun began to set behind him, casting long shadows across the land, Grant felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He had found his place in the world. He had found his purpose. And for the first time in a long time, he was content. The road ahead would be long, but he was ready. With the strength of his ancestors in his heart and the village's support at his back, he was no longer just a man who had lost everything. He was a man who had found everything he needed within himself. Grant had been traveling for weeks, moving from one village to the next, sharing the lessons of resilience, unity, and hope that had shaped his own journey. The stories he had uncovered in the journals had become more than just memories of his ancestors. They had become a message for the world, a message that spoke to anyone who had ever faced hardship, loss, or despair. The more villages he visited, the more he realized that the world was filled with people who felt just as lost as he had once been. But through his work, through the stories of his family's struggles and triumphs, he began to see a transformation not only in the places he visited, but within himself. The weight of the past no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a guiding light, leading him towards something greater than himself. One quiet evening, as Grant stood looking out over another small town he had just helped revitalize, he paused for a moment. The work had been exhausting, the road long, but something deep inside him told him that this was the path he was meant to walk. His purpose was clearer than ever before. He had always thought of his family's legacy as something he needed to fix, to carry the weight of. But now, he realized that legacy was not a burden, it was a gift, and it was meant to be shared with the world. As the town lights flickered to life below, a sense of peace washed over him. He had found a place in this world, a role to play in the ongoing story of his family, and in the process, he had found healing. The road had not been easy, and there were still many obstacles ahead, but he knew now that he was ready for whatever came next. The stories he had heard from the villagers mirrored his own. Many had lost their families, their homes, their sense of self. But through the power of community, they were rebuilding. They were learning, growing, and finding hope once more. It was that very sense of unity that had transformed his life, and it was the very thing that was transforming every village he visited. The realization struck him. It was not just about rebuilding towns. It was about rebuilding people. Each person he met, each village he helped, had a story. Each person had their own pain, their own history, but through their shared experiences, they could create something beautiful, something stronger than the sum of its parts. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, and Grant couldn't help but smile. He was no longer the man who had walked into the mountains years ago, searching for answers. He was a man who had found them, and with those answers came not just clarity, but a new sense of purpose. He had never imagined that his journey would take him so far, that it would lead him to a place where he could help others heal in the same way he had healed. But here he was, standing on the edge of something much larger than he had ever dreamed. The past had shaped him, but it was the future that now called to him. The next day, as he prepared to leave for yet another village, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. His journey had brought him back to the people, to the land, and to a truth that he had carried with him all along. It wasn't the treasure, the wealth, or the answers that had mattered most. It was the people he had met along the way, the lessons they had taught him, and the healing they had shared. He understood now that his role in this world was not just to uncover the past, but to build the future. The world was full of brokenness, but it was also full of hope. And through the strength of community, there was nothing that couldn't be rebuilt. As he turned and walked down the road toward his next destination, Grant felt the weight of his journey lift. He was no longer a man burdened by loss. He was a man on a mission to share the lessons of the past and inspire others to rebuild, to heal, and to find their own strength in the face of adversity. The road ahead was still long, but he knew now that he was no longer walking it alone. The journey had led Grant across miles of countryside, through countless towns, and into the hearts of people who were ready to rebuild. He had shared the story of his family, of their strength, and of the lessons he had learned, and in turn, he saw the transformation in the communities he had visited. The message was clear. The power of resilience, unity, and community was not something confined to the past. It was something that could build the future. As he approached the final village on his journey, Grant's heart was filled with a mixture of anticipation and peace. He had come full circle, and this was to be his final destination for now. The village, nestled at the foot of a mountain much like the one where his journey had begun, seemed to whisper promises of hope and renewal. There was a calm in the air, and the people of the village seemed to move with a quiet confidence, a feeling that something important was taking place. This village was different. It was as if it had already started to heal before his arrival, as though the land itself had been waiting for someone to come and help guide it forward. The small houses were humble but well-maintained, the streets clean, and there was laughter in the air, children playing, adults working together. Grant had always known that community was where healing began, but now he saw it firsthand. These people had faced their own trials, their own struggles, and had found a way to come together to support each other. He paused at the entrance of the village, taking in the scene before him. For a moment, he thought of the long road that had brought him here, of the struggles, the pain, and the quiet moments of healing that had transformed him. He thought of the old journals, of his ancestors' lessons, and of the village he had left behind in the mountains. He thought of the promise he had made to himself and to those who had come before him, that he would carry forward the lessons they had passed down. He stepped forward, and the people of the village turned to greet him. It wasn't with grand gestures or loud words, but with quiet respect. They recognized him as a man who had walked the path of hardship, and who now stood before them with wisdom earned through struggle. It was an unspoken understanding, a bond that needed no words. He was home, once again. As the day wore on, Grant found himself sharing his story with the village. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just a story of survival, of overcoming loss. This time, it was a story of what came after, of how the people who rebuild do so not just with their hands, but with their hearts. The village listened with rapt attention, their faces filled with a mixture of admiration and hope. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with brilliant shades of orange and pink, Grant felt something stir deep within him. The weight of the journey had shifted. The answers he had been seeking weren't just about uncovering the past. They were about bringing the past and present together in a way that would allow the future to flourish. It was about more than just physical rebuilding. It was about emotional and spiritual rebuilding. He had learned that it wasn't enough to restore the buildings or the land. The true rebuilding came from the people, from within their hearts. It was a lesson that Grant had learned the hard way, but it was a lesson that he would now carry with him for the rest of his life. As he stood in the village square, surrounded by the people who had come to embrace his message, he realized that this was his legacy. It wasn't about fame, it wasn't about wealth. It was about the connections he had made, the lives he had touched, and the knowledge he had shared. This was his gift to the world. He didn't need to search for answers anymore. The answers had been inside him all along, and they were now being passed down to the people who needed them most. The future was now in their hands, and Grant knew that they were more than ready to carry it forward. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the village came alive with light, laughter, and music. Grant smiled to himself as he walked through the square, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. His journey had led him here, and here he had found peace. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time in his life, Grant knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The days grew longer, and the village continued to thrive under Grant's quiet guidance. The transformations that had started months ago had now blossomed into something beautiful, something that had taken root deep in the hearts of the people. The streets were alive with energy, children playing, adults working together, and the familiar hum of community returning to every corner. And though Grant had learned so much from the people he had met, it was in this village that he finally realized the full weight of the lesson he had been carrying all along. The most significant rebuilding happens not in the things we create, but in the connections we nurture. As the seasons shifted once more, Grant found himself reflecting on the journey he had made, how far he had come from that broken man who had arrived in the mountains, lost and grieving. He was no longer a stranger in this village. He was home. His past, once a source of pain, now felt like a powerful foundation on which he could stand and build. He had carried the weight of his family's legacy for so long, but now he understood it was never meant to be a burden. It was meant to be a light, guiding him forward, helping him find his place in the world. Every day, Grant continued to work alongside the villagers, sharing what he had learned from his own healing process. They spoke of the challenges they faced, but there was always hope in their voices, hope that had not been there before. The trust that had been rebuilt, the unity that had once seemed impossible, was now a source of strength for everyone. Grant realized that, in a way, this was his true inheritance, the ability to give others the tools to rebuild themselves, to guide them toward their own path of healing. It was not about fixing everything. It was about creating a space where people could come together, face their pain, and find the strength to keep moving forward. One evening, as the village gathered around a bonfire in the town square to celebrate the first harvest of the season, Grant stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes watching the dance of the flames. Scout, ever by his side, sat quietly next to him, his gaze calm and steady. The warmth of the fire reflected in Grant's eyes, and as he watched the faces of the villagers, smiling, laughing, and sharing in the simple joy of community, he felt a profound sense of peace. It was the kind of peace he had been searching for all along, and it was here now, in this very moment, in this village he had helped heal. He no longer felt the weight of the past. He had found a way to honor it, not by trying to change it, but by accepting it and using it as a foundation for something new. He was ready for whatever the future would bring, not because he had all the answers, but because he knew how to face what was ahead. He had learned that the greatest strength came not from avoiding the past, but from embracing it, learning from it, and using it to guide others. He had been given a second chance to rebuild, not just the town, but himself. And as the flames flickered and the stars above the mountain twinkled in the clear night sky, Grant knew he had found his place in the world. He was no longer the man who had lost everything. He was the man who had found everything he needed within himself, and with that knowledge, he was ready to face whatever came next. The road ahead, though uncertain, no longer held fear. It held hope. Hope for the future, for the village, and for the legacy of his ancestors that would continue to guide him. With a deep breath, Grant turned toward the people around him, his friends, his community, his family. Together, they would walk into the future, their hearts filled with the knowledge that, no matter what challenges came, they could face them as one. Veteran stories have always held a unique place in our hearts, filled with resilience, courage, and the powerful transformation of those who have served. In this inspiring tale, a veteran embarks on a journey of self-discovery, loss, and healing, ultimately discovering the true meaning of family, community, and legacy. As the veteran learns about his family's past and uncovers hidden treasures, he not only rebuilds his own life, but also helps to restore a village that had long been forgotten. Through the strength of his ancestors' lessons, he inspires others to rebuild their lives, fostering a sense of unity and hope within the community. Along his journey, this veteran's stories highlights the importance of facing one's past, embracing the present, and looking toward the future with determination. It is a story of perseverance, of reclaiming lost strength, and of finding purpose after unimaginable grief. As the veteran becomes the guiding light for others, the village flourishes, and his own healing deepens. This powerful story of a veteran's transformation resonates deeply with those who understand the trials of life and the power of community. With each challenge faced, the veteran stories reflect not just the rebuilding of a village, but also the emotional and spiritual rebuilding of a man who once felt broken. Through the strength of these veteran stories, we learn that the greatest treasures lie not in material wealth, but in the connections we make, the wisdom we share, and the healing that comes from embracing our shared humanity.